like to thank everybody for making the time to join us this afternoon. Also would like to thank our colleague, Professor Andrew Robson from University of New England, who'll be joining us in chairing this session. And also do want to acknowledge Georgia Perlman and Marissa Marfan at UNE and University of Queensland, who've made sure everything here works properly for us. So we'll do a little bit of housekeeping and then get into things for today. So just a reminder, if you are joining now, can you just keep your microphones on mute and your cameras off? We will come back to a discussion section a little bit later on, and we'll ask everyone basically if they do want to talk to turn on your microphone and also your cameras, so it is a bit more of a, I guess, a social presentation as well. Okay, I think, Andrew and myself, great. Okay, moving on. Okay, so just to begin with, before I start, it is highly appropriate for us to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands and waters on which we meet across Australia, and pay our respect to their elders past and present, and also acknowledge the current and emerging generation of Indigenous leaders, and also recognise the significant contribution that they've had to the development of our country and in the ongoing development of our country, and also acknowledge that we are working together with these groups in moving forwards for looking after our country. Okay, so a couple of things just about the workshop today. If you are having technical challenges with seeing or hearing things on the screen, please type it into the chat window, and one of us will try to respond in as timely a manner as possible to address problems. Second thing is we are recording this, so essentially any audio or video is recorded. Anything in the chat window, whether it's a public chat or a private chat, is also recorded as well. We will be providing copies of the slides and responses to the survey results for everybody to look at, along with recommendations on how we can go forward working together in this space. And this series of workshops is really about, how can we work more effectively together to develop and deliver crop mapping approaches, products and services across industry, government, and other areas in Australia and potentially overseas as well. And a big part of it is also how do we bring research in and use that to move forward all of our different approaches. We have research going on in universities and research institutions, but we also have government agencies and private companies doing this as well. So just to be clear, we're trying to be inclusive, recognising there's a large group of people there. So in terms of the structure for today, we've just gone through the first two items there. I'm going to hand over to Andrew Robson in a second to go through a little bit more background for today's workshop and where it sits into this series of three and what we're trying to do with it. We're then going to review the extensive survey results that we've gotten from the community about essentially how you're collecting and using crop information, using it to produce maps, and what's needed to do to move forward. We'll have a short break and then have a discussion about, well, how do we go forward to try and more effectively work together in developing and testing data sets and methods, providing nationally available data sets and capabilities, and then working across whether it's industries, whether it's industry with government or government working with community. How do we do that more effectively to make sure we've got the best crop classification information possible? And then we'll wrap it up at around 2:30 Brisbane time. And there will be another session tomorrow, which Andrew will explain in a minute. So I'm going to hand you over to Andrew now, who's going to do a background, and I'll advance the slides. Andrew.
Cool. Thank you very much, Stuart, and thank you everyone again for joining. We've got a lot of new faces today, more industry compared to yesterday. So there's going to be recordings for each of these workshops, and the chats and everything are made available afterwards. So we won't spend too much time going over what we did yesterday. But the main purpose of yesterday was to work out what was available, what were the different products, and who were the producers. And I think even though it was a bit, for those not directly involved, that it might have been a little bit heavy to get through, but it was definitely a worthwhile culmination of information of where we currently stand. And I think most importantly, where there's still holes and gaps, where there's industries that we can include that aren't included currently, better integration of the information from the different sources that are being produced. And that's from government and commercial agencies and research. There's also discussions about data privacy and improving the temporal and spatial resolution, having some sort of matrix associated with accuracy. Definitely there was a big interest or support for this collaboration, or investigating ways we can collaborate with this. And I did clearly say yesterday, it's not meaning that we're all in this doing everything together. The main goal is to develop this base level mapping at a high temporal and spatial resolution for all cropping systems in Australia. So outside of that, all agencies and research and commercial groups are very happy to keep doing what they're doing and building their markets, and hopefully using this resource to benefit them as well. So a big part of this today is getting the industry perspective on this. So to make sure we get this right going forward, we need to make sure the industries have the appropriate time and place to say what they need, what their concerns are, what are the resolutions, both how often it needs to be updated and down to the crop level and things like that. And it's been really good. We had a really good response to the survey, which we'll start going through in a minute. And again, like yesterday, it does provide some really good insights into start understanding the needs of the different groups. It's a lot better than sitting here and making assumptions based on what we think people want. And I'll reiterate that very strongly. So this is based on a lot of feedback. So it's really good. So we'll start going through the survey results in the first instance. I'll do the first half, and then Stuart will do the next, and then we'll give you the opportunity to add further comment. Hang on, Stuart, I've missed something. Oh yeah, this was, there was a really good question yesterday raised by Peter Scarth, actually, saying, where's this sitting and what is the overall objective? So we worked through the night to come up with this very pretty graphic. So all we're trying to understand at the moment is this consultation part is what's currently available, what are the industry needs, and then can we establish a collaborative network to go forward. And as you see, it's based on the input from industry, research agency, government agencies, and commercial and NGOs. From there, from following these three workshops, we'll come up, the group will come up with will collate recommendations based on this discussion. And then hopefully with that and gleaning interest, and as I said, the interest in doing this, both that will come out today and yesterday, is really strong. So we're confident we're on the right track. And the last bit is, if we get the support to do this, we'll establish the group and then really come up with a good framework to move forward to deliver this base product, or this base national product at the end. So we are here. If you can see my mouse, that's where we are. So we're only in the consultation stage. So again, thank you for those for joining in and contributing to the surveys, which now we'll move on to. Thanks, Stu. So we had a really good response, as I said, with the focus being industry bodies, a lot of government agencies, both federal and state. We had a few universities. Remember, this is more aimed at the end users, so we wouldn't have expected a lot of developers involved in participating in this survey. On the right-hand side, you can see there's a lot of industries involved, and it's really good. They range from the sort of RDC level right down to some more targeted different industry groups. So again, hugely appreciative for taking the time to add your comments and concerns to this. This can't be done without your support. So this will be made available, these slides and overviews are made available, so I won't read them all out. I'm sure you guys will scan them all already, and gals. Thanks, Stuart. So we'll work through each of the survey questions, and sorry it's a little bit, stay with us, because the results, again, like yesterday, are very interesting in understanding what's the field. So the main observation from the first one was just, was just to get an idea of where the different demographic of survey people came from. And as you can see, the majority were made up with sort of industry and state and Commonwealth government, with a few other groups as well. So we had a pretty good balance across the board. Thanks, Stuart. So we wanted to list the number of, the end users to list a range of products they're currently using. And as you can see here, the ACLUMP data, the government data that's been developed and has been done for many years, providing land cover over all of Australia. That was the predominant one, with 56% of the participants saying they've used it, or 17 out of the 30 odd. There was a range of research products as well listed, and again, the breakdown of those will be provided in the report. And there were a number of commercial providers. So you can see there is parts being played by different groups from what's currently being used. Thank you, Stuart.
Actually, can I ask a clarification question?
You sure can.
Okay. What do you mean by research products?
Good question. There's a whole list of, in the surveys, people have documented different ones on my slide at the moment. I can actually find that for you later up and put that up during the discussion session if you want, Stuart. We've tried to collate it as simple as possible for this instance, but yeah, we'll dig it up. For those listening, make sure if you've got questions as we're going along, please drop them in the chat box, because there's plenty of occasion later for them to be raised and addressed. So thank you, Stuart, for breaking the ice. Okay, so the spatial scales. So this is, as I said, the industry users of this data currently. It's, again, a good balance. So there seems to be a demand from all scales, all the way from sort of paddock level all the way up to national. So again, that sort of reiterates we're on the sort of right track of what we're doing. Cool, thank you, Stuart. This was really interesting. So demand for the temporal resolution of this mapping. I mean, of course, we'd like to see it updated every week, every day, if that was feasible and possible. But the main response came back that yearly would be a sufficient update. But I think we need to keep in mind also that the different seasonal crops. So it could potentially be every 6 months to meet that response, depending on the region and the farming system. But again, an interesting result that even if we achieve the yearly update in the first instance, down to the paddock level, it's meeting a large part of the market demand so far. Okay, the benefits. So the main one, as you can see there, so we've dropped in, as you can obviously see, the main observations from the charts at the bottom. So a fair percentage, so 90%, wanted to better understand or use this information to better understand industry metrics. So the area of production, the extent, what regions it's covering over, and annual growth, not meaning annual growth of the crops themselves, but the spread and change of the industries within certain regions. That's really interesting that that's the predominant one. Obviously, that's very beneficial for value-adding information for all that transport, logistics, and all that sort of stuff that all the value-adding information builds onto. The other one, which was really important, is the, oops, sorry, Stuart, I haven't got finished yet. A bit too keen on the trigger finger. So the next one is the biosecurity and natural disaster. And definitely with the tree crop work we've been involved in the past, that was one of the main drivers, particularly up north with a high likelihood of flooding events and cyclones, understanding where the crops were, understanding those that were affected by these incidences and being able to quickly quantify impact to those industries particularly for understanding market selling beyond that. Biosecurity is a huge one. Many people have done this mapping for a while, and we do have some representatives from different biosecurity agencies will know that in response to an outbreak, being able to know where the crops are, to set exclusion zones, to stop traffic in and out of those areas, and to deploy on-ground surveillance teams is imperative to control spread. And unless you know where the crops are and it's up to date, it's very difficult to do that in within the first few days of an outbreak. So that was good that was reiterated, with 76+% identifying that as a priority. So productivity mapping and forecasting, obviously that's one of the significant value adding. Knowing the area of production is an important factor for forecasting productivity, particularly if you're transitioning a average yield over years, for example. If your area is wrong, then that'll throw out your whole calculation of regional yield prediction. The integration with farming software, that was really important. So that's, I'll see that as being two ways. One is feeding information from existing software on farm into this, and similarly being able to take the final product back into additional farming systems to be able to make decisions and to build on it. So the value adding, I actually thought that might have come out a bit more. That was, again, shows that assumptions can be dangerous. I thought the use of this base layer would significantly benefit a lot of decision making down the value chain. The things that are listed there, I don't have to read them out, but I think the more the understanding, the more the better spatial and temporal resolution of this product or products at the end, and the more access to this, the more that side will really take off. Because for us that have been doing the mapping, us as in the collective involved here, been involved in the mapping for some time, understand the benefit of that. Many others are new to the process. So I think that covers that one, Stuart.
So just while I change, Andrew, there was a question from Andrea Koch on asking if you could clarify what's meant like crop classification in the context of today. And that's, yeah, apologies, that should have been something we defined at the start. I'll let Andrew have the floor.
Yeah, sorry about that. Again, yeah, sorry, there's a lot of people on today that weren't on yesterday. So what we mean by crop classification is identifying from the paddock to the farm to the national level what particular crops in each area. So right down to the level, hopefully, of saying, you know, that's avocado, that's barley, that's cotton, down to that level. So crop classification is defining the type of crop that's growing in that location at that time. Hopefully that makes sense.
There's a clarification question from Peter Scarth there. Is this about boundary mapping or what's within the boundaries or both?
Yeah.
Or do we want to save that to the discussion because those are different pieces of information?
So save that for the discussion, Stuart?
Yeah. Okay.
Leave Peter hanging or answer now?
No, I think this is a critical issue that affects how this engages with people and what it produces. So I think it's a good point that we'll flag for the discussion. So thanks, Peter.
Sorry, Peter, you're just going to have to hang on. Okay. Okay. So we've been talking about the need quite loudly about the need for accuracy of these of this base layer at the end. And from those responses here, you can see that the majority, so nearly 97%, would require it to be 70% or better accuracy. And I'm taking that to be at the crop level in its classification. So I think mostly it demonstrates that having some accuracy metrics to what's provided is imperative. We can't just, put up lots of pretty maps and things like that. It has to have some due diligence to demonstrate how accurate it is. And that would be the layers coming in to support this, as well as the final layer that's produced. Stuart?
So just quickly, can we bring that up in discussion as well? Because how that's produced is, and having information for people to decide whether it was produced in a certain way, that the accuracy figure would be helpful. Yep. Thanks.
Well, and there was, in yesterday's discussion with the current products, there was a range. It was good to see that most people developing products at the moment did have some sort of accuracy process in place, and there was a big list of different ones. So it was good to see that that was already occurring generally. Next one, please, Stuart. Okay. Yeah, so being that this was the industry session, was identifying what information within this national map would they consider appropriate for public consumption. Now, this is important. We did flag yesterday quite a few times that the Aussie Farm Maps a number of years ago, which put a lot of information online and inspired a lot of activist action, which did cause quite a lot of damage with trust with industries with mapping products such as this or what's proposed. So it was good to see the responses come in, and definitely data privacy was put up a lot by a lot of the respondents. So as you can see from here, the crop type identification, so whether it is, again, barley, wheat, cotton, avocados, mangoes, whatever, is deemed okay, with 87% saying that level of information was fine, followed by crop extent. So the location and even area. And that sort of goes back to the question that Peter asked, which we'll get to in a minute. So having it properly delineated as well for area. You can see variety, interestingly, wasn't much interest in having that at this original base layer. But keep in mind that anyone who value adds this information, whether it's commercial, whether it's research or government, that sort of information with their respective industry groups can be added onto this in their own rights. Definitely not grower name in this version, so only 6% said they were happy with that. Crop inputs used, there was some flagging of saying that was okay. And productivity information, so actual yield, probably financials associated with that as well. There wasn't a lot of interest in making that available in this layer, and that's totally understandable. So that's probably that one. I'll do one more, Stuart, and then actually you can go from there, the nice pretty charts, if you like. So I'll mute myself and you can jump into it.
Cool. All right, thanks, Andrew. And so just a reminder to everyone to keep those questions coming. It's extremely helpful, and I think as Andrew's stressing, we don't necessarily have the answers. This is about trying to find out what are ways forward in this space. So the 8th question was about data contribution. Would your industry, business or operation contribute data to the development of the layers that might make up this national capability under appropriate privacy stipulations? And those stipulations obviously are amount of information displayed, licensing, etc. So the majority of respondents here did say yes, but then there's also some caveats there as well, which is completely understandable. People also noted that this would vary between crop type and industry as well. So, for the sample of the population we looked at, we did get a yes to this. But keep in mind that there's a certain amount of bias there, but still a yes. Item 9, would your industry or business pay for access to crop classification products? And that could be on a whole range of different payment scales, and we don't know what those are at the moment. We're not even suggesting that they're there. It depends on how the model may potentially be set up down the track. I mean, obviously there's subscription services, there's fee for access, and it also depends on how the data are used. But if you have a look at there's a broad range of responses there. A third of the respondents saying yes. There was some qualifications there. We had sort of 12% saying no, but the majority saying maybe, and there's a a lot of conditions in there around those maybes, which are outlined in all of the points on the right, which you'll be able to read through a little bit later on. And that's going to depend on, you know, the type of payments, the level of payments, you know, what the degree of control is on the use of the information, you know, where the information's actually sourced from initially as well, and, you know, who's paid for it. Is it public versus private? How's it going to be updated and maintained? There's a whole range of things there. So, you know, this is probably the least definitive response in terms of what might this actually look like, and that's partly because it's sitting across public-private space as well. So, all right. Question 10 was on data format. So the format that the data could be provided in that suits people within the industry. So this is, we're talking about geospatial or geographic data. It's file formats, it's associated metadata that goes with it. In some cases, this limits you to proprietary software or other types of open access software, and limits what you or others can do with the data set. Obviously, if the data are in a let's say, difficult format, and you're dealing with large amounts of it, it's a significant amount of work to transform that data and get it into a form that it's usable. And so, you know, there was a range of options which were given there. Some of them are tied to specific proprietary software packages. Some of them are essentially being able to access machine readable files. Some of it's just down to actual physical file formats. And some people saying you just need file formats, etc., that are interoperable as well. So no one definite answer there, and we're not at this stage saying everybody needs to collect data in a specific way and share it in a specific way. Concerns, there were a range of responses there. Data privacy in terms of what was included and who had access to it, and level of detail was the main concern. And the ones which are listed there give you an idea of the range of other concerns that people had. You know, it's in terms of ownership, licensing, restrictions, and then it comes down to exactly how much detail is provided as well. Benefits that people could identify there, you know, a bit like concerns, you know, that there are a wide variety of benefits. A number of them did sort of group together if you want to look at it in some areas, and the main benefits were, you know, reduced effort and duplication either at a public or private agency end, the ability to essentially more effectively build or value add if all of industry has access to common data sets as well, sharing the costs of doing things as well. So in a lot of cases, the predominant, you know, advantage or benefit was that ability to remove, you know, some of the steps which people had to take on themselves in collecting and processing data, as long as it's paid for initially, and sharing it and having everybody using it as well. The point about data replication, we're moving quite rapidly into a space where there are going to be multiple versions of products, whether it's crop classifications, whether it's vegetation cover across the continent, whether it's looking at solar panel counting. People are going to produce a whole range of different products. We're not going to get away from that. That diversity of approaches is good. We just need a way for people to decide which one's fit for use for them as well. So diversity is a good thing there. Okay, stop there and then I'll hand back to Andrew. Andrew, did we want to have a break for a couple of minutes there?
Yeah, I think so. If people, I think it's a good opportunity for people who've got to consider what we've just run through. I don't know why I did that, but consider what they want to, what we've just discussed, and come up with some questions to open for the following discussion. Because as we said yesterday, if you don't ask, we can't cover your concerns or your requests. So please put some time to that. So there's some couple of points there that that just as seeding thoughts into the discussion section. So yes, I think let's have a break for, what do you want? 5 minutes. So what is it, Queensland time? 1:36?
Yeah, so yeah, 22 the hour.
Yeah, that sounds good, mate.
Cool. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, and just reminder in the break, if you're not having a break and you've got some thoughts or concerns there, yeah, type them into the chat window there. Okay, folks, looks like we got a number of us coming back now and a lot of questions in there, which is really good. I think, Andrew, just in terms of going forward, to clarify for everyone, so the aim here is to open it up for discussion. One, around some of the points that we've covered in the survey results. And I do want to point out, that survey is by no means exhaustive. Yes, if we sample a different group, we get different questions. But, when you do look at the representation across different levels of government, parts of industry that use this information and parts of industry that produce it, as well as groups that are, in universities and research institutions that are, involved in developing these, it is relatively wide. I mean, obviously we're never going to cover everyone, but that's good. So we'll go back over some of that. There are also some key points which have been summarised there that you can see on the screen there, which we may or may not get to. The aim is to continue this until essentially between 1:15 and 20 past the next hour, and then do a sum up to lead into the discussion tomorrow. The aim for tomorrow is to identify a draft or sort of straw person outline of how could we work collectively in this space to move forward. And so that's essentially what the discussion's about now, is what are key considerations for that, particularly if we go back to the diagram that Andrew had at the start. The aim is to try and build a better coordinated national capability to do this, so that each of the groups, that we can do our work more effectively, that people in industry can develop products and serve different markets, and also work with government on doing that, and that there's a good path for, in terms of doing research for use in industry and government, and that we're also training people to do these things as well. So, Andrew, just in terms of the questions, did we want to go back up the list there and essentially maybe start with the one from, I think, that Peter and several others, and I think Yvette and others commented on, about crop boundaries versus crop types? Like, what do we see as the consistency and constituents of the system? And the other thing here is, this is also to get Andrew and me to stop blabbing as much and to listen to everybody else. So I'm going to ask Peter if he could just clarify the point he made at 1:21 p.m. in the chat window that says, I'm still unsure if this is a crop classification of data at a common land unit or just mapping boundaries. So Peter, just want to add some context to that?
Yeah, not so much. I think just the first slide that popped up, it had delivery and national crop classification capability. There's lots of C's in there, and And you know, I can't help but think of the, you know, like the European Common Agricultural approach, where you have a crop classification capability, and that is within land parcels, and they're two very different things. So, you know, actually classifying a crop, you know, I don't know if you read, you know, Sentinel Hub are doing a lot of work on that at the moment, and they call it a self-inflicted problem, the crop type classification problem. It deserves some deep thinking, but also the, you know, parcels do. And I sort of came here thinking this is about parcels and not crop classification, but then, because they're two very different things, you know, I can have an algorithm which will do crop classification, and that's a very different thing with data privacy, because it's just here is a thing, and you give it some sort of boundary. I don't care where that boundary is, and it returns some sort of crop classification. Whereas if you've got boundaries with managements attached to them, that's a very different thing from privacy. So it's what's being talked about here. Is it the boundary, and then there's a property boundary, there's a field boundary, and there's a management unit within the field boundary problem, and then it's also what is going on in there. And I think you're talking about both of them, but I'm not entirely sure. But they're two different things.
Yeah, can answer that. I think it would be a combination of both. So there is a number of groups doing input data files at the moment, or baseline data files, or of paddock boundaries or crop delineation at the moment. It would be nice if that could be contribute to this as a base level. Again, keeping in mind, and the crop classifications that are being done by its respective group as well. But keep in mind that they're not being done at the paddock level. There's still a lot of work on the paddock level to refine them, and this is part of the discussion on how accurate do we need it, and how can we build on existing data sets in a positive way, I suppose. So, short answer to your question is, I think it's both. One is delineating crops correctly, and the second one is identifying what's in that crop correctly as well.
Andrew, it's David here. If I could comment, I missed yesterday's discussion, but to me the use cases for this are absolutely critical, because it helps define all sorts of issues around privacy, boundaries, granularity of the data you collect. As you know, our use cases in the CRC are very much strategic, and they're to do with land allocation, yield prediction, and resolving conflict to around things like water allocation. So, and there's a question here from local government too. Where does local government fit in? And as you know, we're working with local governments around strategic planning for their regions, and that's related to how you optimize your crops and really understand what you're using the natural resource base to produce, and what alternative scenarios are for production. That then, of course, feeds into state and federal government challenges around water allocation and the structural adjustment we're going to need to see around the farm sector with regard to climate change and those sorts of things. So if the use case is to provide consistent coverage of who's growing what where and what could a baby be growing instead, that's very different to the sort of use case you get with AgX and Syngenta and those high granularity commercial models, which are about really engaging with customers around the sale of goods and so on. So, which is it? Is it trying to be something for everyone, or is it addressing a very specific set of use cases or a single use case?
That's a really good question. I think if we try and do everything for everyone, we do run into the overcomplicating it, and it will step on a lot of toes and cause a big bun fight. So I think as we said at the start, the main aim was to develop a base layer with higher granularity that's currently available. And that means in terms of the cropping systems, trying to include all cropping systems, because some have fallen through the holes. It also includes the accuracies from the paddock level up. That's the first instance. The value adding that you're talking about will come inevitably from a good data set that's established. The uses from this, if we're successful in achieving it, are endless. I just worry that if we try, we can't do everything within this initial base map, but just keep in mind there's a lot of opportunity to value add onto it.
But my follow-up question, if you don't mind me asking one, is it's a bit chicken and egg. If you don't define the use cases, at least in general terms, people won't be willing to contribute data. They're going to want to know how it's going to be used. I guess that's fairly obvious point. So is it possible to somehow get people to agree to provide high granularity data on understanding, but nothing will be made public until those more detailed use cases are articulated? How are you going to get that base layer, and what sort of granularity of the base layer? That's the same question everyone's been asking, I guess.
Yeah, so yesterday's discussion was working out who was doing what. So there's a lot of groups already involved in doing a lot of this crop classification, particularly for grains, and there's tree crops, and there's cotton and rice, and viticulture as well. Just off the top of my head, there's a few others there. So that level of information is already being collated to quite a high level. As I said, there's missing crops within that. So the first goal of this was to work out what's there, and was there a way we could collate a level of information from those existing data sets that doesn't that's complementary to what's being done. I think it's the first step.
Yeah, but is the aim to know for any given parcel of land in Australia what is being grown on it?
Yeah, I mean, ideally, because it doesn't exist, and that came out very clearly yesterday.
Oh, that's what we want. That's what we all want. But if that's for use, that's the fundamental use case, is to know who's growing what where, and to get rid of the sort of the generalizations you have in the ABARE data, which are pretty useless if you're trying to do anything strategic.
Well, I think everything's developed for different levels, and they all do what they need to do very well. But if you try to extrapolate certain information from data sets, there will be, and that's across the board, there will be deficiencies. So I think that's very careful how you phrase that. They're designed for different purposes.
Fair point.
This is the opportunity to try and integrate or link some of those data sets so that the common available one can benefit the respective groups feeding into it and using it through the whole chain. Has anyone else got any comments about that? I don't want to dominate this discussion, so please raise your hand and contribute.
So you're mainly asking people to comment on, like, what is the main use case that
yeah, I'm sure there was points in that discussion which may have and Peter's question initially that would have flagged comments and questions about that. So I encourage to participate in either ask verbally or type in. There's a few popping up there, Stuart, if you want to have a look at them.
Yeah, there's a number of questions there, and there's a couple of threads there. It'd be good to dig into the use case one and hear from other people if that's, ideally what is required in terms of that level of granularity that David's suggesting, and is that something industry contributes to, and and you can work out a suitable governance and level of technical licensing control of how people access it. There's some suggestions there, so it'd be good to hear those. Any other thoughts that people have on that? And I think once we get through that a bit, then we can go into accuracy and some of the other ones as well.
Stuart, it's Andrea Kosh.
Hi, Andrea.
Hi. I'm just wondering, is this a conceptual research project, or is there who would have ownership of this platform, and then ongoing management responsibility? Excellent
question. That's something we had a couple of discussions on already. To be clear, this isn't meant to be a research project. It's meant to be, how do we work together in this space? That does mean we've got to figure out how to do things. So, at that level is research, and we work out the best way forward, but it needs to sit somewhere where there can be appropriate, funding obtained, governance and process applied, without duplicating what happens in some existing national processes as well. I mean, this is clearly one where there's a lot of industry interest in terms of contributing and using it as well. So it needs some development work to set up properly, and that's partly what the discussion is tomorrow, is how do we start this process, giving them maybe some models for it, and then it would move forward to actually be, what we've called a capability in that sense. Andrew, I realise I've added some context there. Do you want to add in on top of that? You're on mute.
So you're talking to me, Andrea, or to Andrew?
No, sorry, to Andrew. Sorry, Andrew Robson.
Sorry, I just decided to talk on mute. No, I think you answered that quite well. Remember, what's come out clearly of this is there is, I won't say holes, but there is things we can do better. There are opportunities to build on what's currently available. And in that path of the diagram where we're up to, this is purely understanding where we're up to and what those holes are. The discussion of where you're asking is a very valid one, and that's part of the discussion going forward on where this would sit, the governance and everything that Stuart just mentioned then. So it's a really good point, and very keen to have you engaged in that discussion to make sure we do that without duplicating it.
So Andrea, does that help at least clarify partly the way forward?
Yeah, I think it's sort of, I'm framing it in my mind in the context of a much bigger and broader agricultural data kind of discussion. And there's these questions are being asked everywhere, and we have, there's so many kind of crossovers between public and private data sets now that they're not easy to answer, but I think they are always those questions that you need to kind of keep raising and understanding where this is going to sit and so forth.
Right, thanks. I mean, that is what you brought up is essentially the crux of the discussion tomorrow in terms of how to move forward in this space as well. All right. Andrew, are you happy that we move on to some other points? I think one of the points that we flagged before we come back a little bit to data privacy was accuracy. And, the answer to that question of, that the people do want an accuracy, specification or something to decide what it is, is something that I think we do need to look at as one of the communities that collects and uses Earth observation. There's a variety of ways to produce accuracy and error, and they're different, and it's often hard to compare them. So I guess we're interested to hear what people's thoughts are. Is it absolutely essential that these products have some measure of accuracy, or do they at least need some other piece of information with them to decide that they're fit for use, and people who then take the products, make a decision there. I guess I open that up to the floor. So I guess when I'm asked about accuracy and I'm comparing two products, and obviously it's a scientific bias, but I want to know how people collected the samples. What did they actually collect? How does it match from the reference data in terms of its spatial and temporal resolution to the mapped data? And then how did, is that a representative sample and all these other things? And I know that's sort of, it's scientific and meant to be that, but there's at least a method, and I can go, okay, here's the level of confidence that we have in that product in these areas. If you're using it for research purposes, maybe it's not as important, but if it's a product that your company depends on, if it's a government agency using it to implement policy, and that it's just going to end up in legal proceedings, you need a defensible way of saying this is what we produced and how accurate it is. So open it up there.
Stuart, it's Bob Walton from ABS too. I would say for our use, it's very valuable to have some sort of measure of it.
Rob, can you turn your microphone up, mate? That's better.
Yeah,
that's
I'll
better.
just swing it down so I don't have my aerial up in the air. Yeah, I'll start again. From the ABS perspective, I think it's really important to have a measure of accuracy. I think it could be, like I can imagine it could be quite tricky to know how to portray that, because, you know, for some crops that grow over a wide range of areas in Australia, that accuracy could be quite good in some places and then not as good in other areas. So thinking about how you present that would be a challenge as well. But yeah, that's my perspective.
Right, thanks, Robin. Any others to add into that, like maybe from an industry perspective?
David, again, the point raised before about the land parcel capability issue, I think is a good one. There are certain parcels of land where they might typically rotate 3 or 4 or select different crops. It'd be good to identify those options so that you can run different scenarios for the basic data set. So in other words, build a primary modeling layer into the data set so that you can run a visualization for a particular climatic scenario or a commodity price cycle scenario. Do you see what I'm saying? If you look at the Namoi, which we're studying in some detail, now that the mixed farming enterprises there may switch out of number of crops. The cotton farmers in particular have quite a variable pattern of land use. And I think it could be very valuable to somehow try and capture that, build that into the data model, if you see what I mean.
Yes.
Yeah, is that too hard?
No. Again, this is all, we haven't even got the basic layer established. There's still holes in that basic layer. So and this is where the opportunities are endless again. So we're trying to work out how to get this basic layer done at that higher granularity and spatial and temporal resolution. And from there, the stuff you're talking about, the opportunity.
Can you go, sorry, Andrew, it's probably a naive question, but can you go top down from a spatial imagery and using your algorithms, you know, smash out layers at different times of year where you have a certain probability of this actually being a crop that's grown if you triangulate different sources? So you could start up with that big picture of regions.
Yeah, it's so a lot of that is happening.
Yeah.
David, there's quite a lot of groups doing that in Australia already.
Okay.
The problem is, not the problem, linking that together, understanding, sorry, Stuart, that's your calendar just popped up then. Linking that together and having some quality and metrics associated with that. And yeah, I suppose this is more to make it cohesive across the whole Australian environment, not just bashing out one region here and there. I mean, that's happening already quite widely. So this is sort of a little bit bigger, trying to make it more cohesive in the first instance. So it's a little bit different. There's a lot of people bashing things at the moment.
Yeah, cohesive is the key thing, and completeness, having a complete layer, but getting at high granularity is going to be very, very difficult. So you have to start probably at a fairly high level if you want completeness. Is that right? A cohesive set across the whole of Australia, you need to start at a fairly high level, a low level of detail.
Yeah, so we've got the ACLUMP layers is that course of detail, which is updated every 3 years, which is, again, it's a fantastic data set for time series over time. This is the opportunity to try and bring that down to a higher spatial resolution with the parties that are working in the different fields at the moment.
Yep.
So it really does fill a void. The next step forward, linking those together better. I might, Rowan Rainbow's asked a few questions here. Stuart, I might throw it across to him if he wants to turn on the mic and elaborate.
Can I just put some context? I think, yeah, I do. Ryan's put a number of points in there which are quite interesting, and it also relates to what Peter Starks just posted down the bottom there as well. And this gets down to, well, what is that when, you know, I think Rowan, you said, well, the people need 85 to 95% identification accuracy, classification accuracy. Like, what does that mean? And I think Peter's also talked about boundaries versus labelling areas as well. So, yeah, I'm interested to hear what Rowan, just the context to your 2 points there.
Yeah, well, there's certainly different elements, and for boundaries, in effect, they need to be almost 100% accurate, really. There's no real way around that, partly because if you, particularly at the ABS level, are starting to use, or for biosecurity response or whatever, if you need to, utilise issues around property identification codes and this sort of layer of information down the track, that those boundaries need to be accurate. But in terms of crop ID, certainly, some people said we're about 75% accurate in identifying a crop type, and that's just not accurate enough to be of use to the industry. That, a 25% margin of error is just too broad to be a useful measure. And in fact, if we're going to go down that path, other forms of estimates are probably going to be more accurate. So, that's if we're talking the use of satellite technology and the like to create that data information. So
sorry to interrupt, Ron, but the key thing there is that from that information you're using, you can determine the accuracy and decide if it's fit for use. I mean, there might be, for other applications, they might have a lower tolerance in terms of, I guess, error and accuracy levels. It's the key thing that you can go in and at least find out with some measure of certainty, this is the level of accuracy.
Yeah, well, we've had discussions, like there's been a grains industry, grain statistics committee established to actually look at this, and we need to be essentially around that sort of, give or take, 5 or 10%, but around that 90 percentile mark in terms of crop ID, really, to be useful. That's the kind of target that we're really looking for, and it doesn't seem like it's going to be impossible to sort of hit the 85% mark. It's just, that last 10% is going to be quite difficult, and that's not as critical. But once you're down, around 75% accuracy, and that could be plus or minus 10 or 15%, it's kind of meaningless. It's actually not useful. So
part of the discussion yesterday, Rowan, which was good to see, is a lot of groups that are developing these layers, it's not predominantly built on satellite imagery alone. There is a lot of industry engagement, and there isn't a lot of on-ground validation, and they are all critical to get the right layers and the right accuracies. So this is why the industry engagement, where they're not considered this is a big brother exercise, but rather they're contributing to an output or products that can help them in their own business, can greatly assure the accuracies that help make up that 10%. Because when we know that just from the tree crops alone, the amount of planting at the moment is phenomenal of tree crops, and you can't identify it from the imagery. You can only identify change of land cover type. It's only with the industry support going around and actually updating it, saying we're telling you that this is what it is, because they're supportive of the process, is why we can keep a good track on that change over years. So that's why we have a lot of industry people here, which they all seem to be on mute at the moment, but feel free to jump in at any time.
Andrew, Andy Clark here. I just wanted to raise the fact that there is a significant difference as well between broadacre and that intensive horticultural spaces, and where, I guess, resolution of that spatial imagery plays a big role in what you're actually capable of being able to classify and determine, and that will have an impact upon those accuracy levels as well. So obviously the level, the form of data that you're actually using for classification purposes is critical in what you are actually capable of being able to deliver also.
Yeah, it's a really good point, Andy, and I think came out of yesterday's survey, and I think may even be today, that one benefit of a collaborative approach would mean that the ability to afford higher resolution imagery over large areas as a shared cost would be a lot more obtainable or achievable as opposed to different groups trying to buy a lot of really high resolution imagery to do this. So hopefully that would be a benefit of the collaboration.
All right. Should we continue the accuracy discussion, or should we go into sort of the privacy side of things, just keeping mindful of time, Andrew?
It would be good to cover some of the privacy, because that was so heavy in the industry responses. It would be nice to get some feedback around that, if possible.
In terms of like major concerns.
Yeah, look, as I said, as an example with the mango industry, when we started doing that, we had a lot of concerns about the Big Brother approach, and we did spend a lot of time explaining this was the purpose for it, this was what data was going to be included, and the industry bodies themselves backed it, so it made it a lot more digestible for the growers and accepted to the point where they were contributing to the development of the map. I think there's an opportunity to do this as long as we relay clearly and transparently what's the goal of this, what information will be provided in there and what won't be, to protect the concerns of those industries. Because if we lose perception this is a Big Brother activity and you alienate the industries, the risk is we just won't achieve what we want to achieve. So there's a lot of questions coming in now. Are they related to that?
Rowan raised his hand. So Rowan, if you just want to unmute yourself.
Yeah, thanks. I'll just figure out how to unraise my hand, so I don't know how to do that. There we go.
That's okay.
Yeah, look, it depends who's using the data and who's accessing it. It's interesting, you know, I made the point before that the producers are legislated under the ABS census to provide quite detailed information around, you know, farm production. So it's always historical, you know, it's always after the event when that data is made public. But growers are quite willing to sort of share that information under that basis. Where there's concern is where that information potentially could be used against them for any reason, whether it be sort of you know, lobby groups under freedom of information accessing information for you know, environmental purposes, or for that matter even commercial traders using that information to their commercial advantage, maybe not always in the interest of producers themselves. The reality is that the large organisations, whether grain traders or whatever, already have to some extent have aggregated and paid for this type of information. The challenge is that the producers themselves don't always have access to it, and I think that there's more of a discussion about having a bit more transparency and an equal footing, so everybody has access to that information. And so it depends who's holding it, when it's made available, and how it's used, and to what level some data is, I suppose, georeferenced or anomalised. And it really depends on the scenario, and it's not the same answer for everything on farm. You know, growers are quite happy to share the production information generally, less happy to share their input information, sometimes less happy to share their stocks that they're actually holding on farm, for example, which can be calculated off the combination of all that imagery. So I think that it's not a straightforward discussion, but there is willingness to share. It's just where and how. It requires a detailed conversation.
Right. Any?
Yeah, I was going to say, I agree completely, Rowan. And I think it's really important, you know, as Rowan was sort of saying, that it's different for different industries. And I think it's really important that you work with those industries to understand the specific sort of concerns that the industry and farmers within the industry might have in relation to, you know, whether you're mapping the presence of a certain crop down to, you know, very, very detailed area, but there's also different levels of questioning or different levels of privacy that you need to think about in terms of what the output data is, and then also some of the input data that you might use for training the algorithms or validating them as well. So I think, yeah, you know, you have to have a strategy for how you manage those separately.
Right. Any other points about data privacy and the like? I think, Peter, you've got US Department of Agriculture, CLUs, I'm not sure what those are. Can you maybe just type those in or let us know?
So, Andrea Kosh again. I'm not sure how to raise my hand.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Go ahead, Andrew.
I just have to yell out. Yeah, so these are all really complex issues that we're talking about, and there's no straight answer. And I don't think as a sector we are that far advanced in terms of working out what the solutions to these discussions are. So I just want to commend you for, you know, opening up this discussion. It's fantastic that you've, you know, that you're addressing it. It's really wonderful. The NFF Farm Data Working Group is also working through these issues, and at the moment we're focusing on looking at research needs against the Farm Data Code. And I know that this is not specifically a research platform, but, you know, it might be worth having you guys kind of engage in that discussion with us. And then you can get an understanding or a feeling for what the debate and the discussion is around farm data privacy in a more general sense. And also then, you know, what are some of the initiatives that are being taken, and how are we slowly kind of moving forward on these issues. So I just wanted to mention that.
Right. Thanks very much, Andrea. That's really helpful, and I think that'll factor into the discussion tomorrow and next steps as well. But yeah, and I think this is about how do we. It is at a tricky point of we're starting. Let's recognise what the challenges are and what groups we can potentially work with to move forward in this space. Because of the number of issues involved.
Stuart, it's also, that's why we've got to be careful not to overcomplicate this initial drive, because if we try and do everything again, it just becomes really complex, and it does start getting people really concerned of what's being done with it and what's being included. If we reflect come back a little bit, there's some really good examples around Australia with different commodities where this is already working really well. And that's a range of different groups working with a range of different industries. I think they can demonstrate this can be achieved. It's just how then do we work together to extrapolate that over the other farming systems. And I think that's the start of the discussion and the goal in the first instance. And then how do we then link appropriately? And I think what's the only way it's going to work with higher level information is potentially through groups like NFF, who have already got a grower consortium they're working with. There's commercial agencies that have grower consortiums that they work with. There's research groups that have consortiums they work with that are trusted. They're happy as a sort of a filter of that higher level information. And it could be that through the value adding of this information down the track, that's when that additional information gets built into it directly with those respective industries. I don't think there's beyond that base level, there's not a one simple answer meets all, because you're going to step on someone's toes, or there's going to be someone who, you know, gets really worried that their data is being used inappropriately.
Rowan's raised your hand.
Yeah, it's just one of the things that's come up a lot in discussions through this working group that we've had. We're well aware that some of the technologies that, for example, the grains industry is looking to utilise at an industry producer level actually already exist to some extent in the commercial realm. And for all intensive purposes, the data or the information that we're sort of seeking to use actually exists, but it's in a commercial model. And the question may not always be about, do we need to build a new system to support that, but under what terms and agreements is their ability to in a commercial sense, to either share that data release, to license the use of that data to some extent. And so I actually, my feeling is it's more a conversation than, okay, if we're going to do that, how do we do that across a common standard of platform? So the ability to exchange that and actually have information associated, like, you know, property ID and these aspects can actually all match up with the same system for other applications. You know, so for, you know, the PIC ID, for example, for a farm or something like that. So that's one of the challenges that we're having. We're well aware that, does industry need to pay for this? Does government need to pay for it? To some extent, some of these services are already being delivered commercially. And so there's a commercial tension, and we could in effect create market failure or disrupt commercial investment if we don't get this model right. And I think that's an area that requires a lot of discussion.
If I could comment on that, David, again, Rowan, I think that's a really excellent point. As you know, we've discussed that with Bob Mullins and so on in relation to the Syngenta AgX type platform. So I think it's worth, Andrew, looking at some kind of API model where you can extract data from these commercial platforms in a relatively low labour way, but subject to all the necessary privacy constraints. So in other words, you can pull data out of a commercial database for strategic purposes and render it in forms which aren't going to create problems for commercial user or owner of that platform, or for the industry partners of that commercial user. And that's actually a very challenging software development and policy development area. It's different to the conventional GIS approach to mapping. It's more computer science, I think. It's related to the ARDC bid we have in at the moment. Andrea, NFF's a partner in that, by the way. We're really trying to look at those federated models for pulling data out of multiple sources to create derived products. Because obviously we've got a major strategic need for these products. And we've got this ridiculous situation where one reinvents the same wheel, but doesn't actually hit the nub of the problem. So, if that point's been registered, we don't want to create a perverse outcome where we create a market failure situation for the people who are doing this very well at commercial level.
Yeah, I think that's been a consideration from the very start, and that's why the very start of this conversation was trying to flag all the commercial providers and their products and what they're currently doing. There's no intention at all to make them feel threatened or to push them out. It's quite the opposite.
Yeah.
What Rowan touched on was their inclusion, and actually their availability of data could be something that they're actually compensated for, because no one has the time or effort to go around and validate or ground truth every single crop. But if certain groups are doing it through their existing processes, there may be an option where they're actually compensated for that access for a certain vetted amount of information, whether it be just crop type. And that's how they may be able to feed into this and then have access to the derived product to value add their further development as well. So they can actually make revenue out of the data that they're doing the hard yards collecting already. So that's one possible model that may work.
That could be a huge win-win, but quite a bit of effort has to go into thinking that through, obviously.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But you've got to have the discussion in the first place, mate. Otherwise, we just keep competing. I mean, we know the status quo at the moment, and in some instances it's working really well. In other instances, it's not. There is a huge demand, as you've seen from the responses from the survey yesterday and today, to see this done. So I think overall there's support. It is going to be difficult. That's why it hasn't been done yet. So I think we've got to giving suggestions on how this can work and being open on getting involved where we're comfortable. I think is that step we've got to be doing firstly.
Right. Sorry, I'm just trying to keep up with the text and the other things. Just also being mindful of time. I think that's covered a lot in the discussion. It's clearly the start of a larger process, but I think we brought out a number of the key concerns to begin with, both discussing them and also through the discussion in the chat windows there. So what we will do now is just move to a summary in terms of where we are today, and then essentially what we'll come back tomorrow with. And so just a bit of lead into what Andrew's going to talk about in a second. So, this is we've got 3 sessions on this. Yesterday was essentially an introduction to the area and what the bigger picture and context was. Today was really about bringing a lot of the industry and government groups together to look at what was being done and how to potentially go forward. We didn't expect to come up with, here's the one way of doing it. I think what we have heard are a number of directions that will help us develop and deliver crop mapping services, and being specific about whether it's identifying actual crops as opposed to the boundaries of fields as well. And then what process we could start to work together to do that. The concerns that we've heard, particularly around so data privacy and data access are a key one. There's ongoing initiatives that we can, I think, develop partnerships with. The concerns about accuracy, what actually is it that we're talking about accuracy of, and how's that reported, is an important one. And then the next stage is really, okay, if we do start a process for, trying to build on what's been done already, a lot of which, we're hearing is sitting in basically commercial environments. How do we build something which enables both the commercial industry to do what's required, government to do what's required, but also doesn't lead to the market failure that Rowan was just talking about, where you see potential industry areas cannibalised by government activities, which is not what we're intending to do, or by subsidised research. So tomorrow is, you did see an example of a discussion of how this might look going forward for a national capability. We would aim to present, here are some potential ways to go forward, keeping in mind, I think David's hit these points really well. To build a capability like this is substantive work in terms of bringing people on board and looking at the arrangements. So it's a start to that process. So having pulled those things together, I might just go to Andrew to finish things off for today. Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, Stuart. Yeah, I think you covered most of it. I think we just got to keep in mind, and I think Andrea mentioned it as well, is that this is the start. This is the start of a whole discussion of many groups to try and bring this together. So we don't have all the answers. We're seeking your input to try and find a way through to get a solution, because we have acknowledged as providers and users that there's shortfalls in the current system. As I mentioned before, the status quo at the moment is there's a lot of products being developed at the moment. Even globally, there's pressures coming in. We have no control of those. We have no control of their accuracies or where that information is going. Not that I don't think we can control it, but we have the opportunity to make sure that we do it well in Australia, potentially as a community, and do it well. And that's all I want to say is just, yeah, I think we can all get caught up on the reasons why this may not work or the problems that may hold it back. They're really important discussion points, but we try and keep it as a constructive thing to keep forward, to move forward. That'll do. The end.
Thanks, Andrew. And so just a reminder for tomorrow, that's what we'll be looking at in terms of going forward. It will be the start of more communications. So again, thanks everybody for your input to the survey and also for your participation today. Looking forward to engaging and keeping this broader group aware of what we're trying to do, and also engaging other groups and activities. And if you think we have missed people or others, should be a part of this, please let them know, and please let us know as well. It is an area, I think, that our state, territory and Commonwealth governments are keen to see us work together on for building it properly. So the time's right on a number of steps for doing this. So again, thanks everyone, and particularly thanks to Georgia and Marissa as well for the technical support and making sure this happens. We will email everyone and let you know when the summary material comes out, and hopefully we see some of you, or a lot of you, tomorrow as well. So thanks everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Stuart.
Thanks, Andrew.